Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing to look at the Lords who contributed in the House of Lords on the 10th of January 2022 in the debate on Lord Blencathra's Amendment 97ZA. That was an amendment proposed into the Police Crime Bill which looked at keeping prisons single-sex and establishing a transgender unit for prisoners to go to if they didn't want to be housed with their birth sex. So let's hear what Lord Pannick says on the matter.
My Lords, this amendment relates to the management of transgender prisoners. The result of the amendment would be that transgender prisoners would ordinarily, and that word is used twice in the amendment, be held in a prison matching their sex as registered at birth. I'll come back to that word ordinarily later on. I should first record my sincere thanks to the noble Lord Blencathra for his time. I'm pleased that he found the teach-in with officials from the MOJ and also HMPPS helpful. I'm grateful also that my noble friend Lord Cormac and noble Baroness of Fox of Buxley were able to attend that teach-in. I'm conscious from what they said then and this evening that I didn't persuade them at that time. I'm not sure I'm going to persuade them in the next few minutes, but I'm going to give it a go. I'm not proposing, however, to refer to anything said on Twitter. That is despite the fact that I think I'm one of the few ministerial Twitterers, or is it tweeters, around. My tweets have become a lot more dull since joining the front bench, but I can say that on this subject, Twitter exhibits heat and no light whatsoever. So I'm grateful for the relative safety and sanity of your Lordship's House. Under the amendment, transgender prisoners who are not held with prisoners matching their sex as registered at birth would be held in separate accommodation such that they have no contact with people of their acquired gender. That is the inescapable result of the amendment. But I do suggest that it is unnecessary. Transgender prisoners can already be held in prisons matching their sex as registered at birth, where this is assessed as appropriate. And indeed, in practice, the vast majority of transgender prisoners are already held in prisons matching their sex as registered at birth. And the small number who are held otherwise have been through a rigorous multidisciplinary risk assessment process. And there is already provision, as I'll explain in a moment, for transgender prisoners to be held separately from other prisoners of their acquired gender if doing so is deemed necessary. We take the allocation of transgender prisoners extremely seriously. This is a subject which, as the last hour or so has demonstrated, arouses a lot of controversy and passion. But the approach we've put in place allows us to strike an appropriate balance, and the noble Lord Cashman put his finger on it. That's the right word. It's a balance between the safety, rights and well-being of transgender prisoners and that of all other prisoners in the estate. And I can assure, therefore, noble Lady Baroness Fox of Buckley, that we do not only look at the position of the transgender prisoner in this context. The officials who are managing the risk know the risk which can be managed, for example, in the women's estate, and they are balancing the risks and working out what is the best solution. I can also assure my noble friend Baroness Mayer that neither I nor other ministers in the department give in to what she referred to, I think I took this down correctly, as noisy and modish pressure groups. Indeed, if I did, I wouldn't be able to take much of the government's business through your Lordship's House. Under the government's current policy, transgender prisoners are initially allocated to a prison matching their legal gender. And as the noble Lady Baroness Barker set out, this is the way we do it. For most transgender prisoners, this is the same as their sex registered at birth. Most transgender prisoners then remain in a prison matching their sex as registered at birth. Transgender prisoners who have not changed their gender by obtaining a gender recognition certificate are only held in a prison opposite to their sex registered at birth, where that is judged appropriate by a multidisciplinary complex case board which consider all relevant factors. And transgender prisoners who have changed their legal gender can still be moved to a prison matching their sex registered at birth, where a case board judges that to be necessary to manage risk. To come back to the words of the amendment, it's not clear what the word ordinarily would actually mean in practice for those making decisions about transgender prisoners. Our current approach is robust, and over 90% of transgender women in prison are held in the men's prison estate. And so I respectfully agree with my predecessor, if I can call him that, my noble friend Lord Folkes, that this is a nuanced and difficult matter. I also agree with my noble friend Lord Herbert of South Downs that this ought to not to be a matter of ideology. It ought to be a matter of putting into place systems which actually work, and we believe our systems do work. The second part of the amendment suggests a facility be created to hold transgender prisoners who are not to be held in a prison matching their sex as registered at birth, separate from other prisoners. Now, the current policy, in fact, allows for this. There is a small part of HMP Downview, known as the House has heard as E-Wing, which is used for this purpose. This allows transgender women with gender recognition certificates to be held separately with only supervised contact with other women where a complex case board has deemed this to be necessary. And such a board can also recommend that a transgender woman with a GRC can be held in a prison matching their sex at birth where their risk is considered too high to be held in E-Wing. All other high-risk transgender women without GRCs are placed in the male estate. But the amendment would, as we've heard, mean placing all transgender women in the women's estate in E-Wing, even where the board had assessed them at posing a level of risk which could be managed in the women's estate. And we don't think that would be fair or appropriate, essentially for the reasons set out by the noble Lord Pannick. I think, just to correct the record, so to speak, when the noble Lord referred to the Home Office, he now obviously means the MOJ. But it would, I think, be to pick up a word which was used, cruel, to do so. I agree with the approach of the noble and learned Lord Hope of Craighead, who said that we have to be alive to all the relevant distinctions and various issues which transgender prisoners present with. And we are alive, as the noble Lord Cushman put it, to the risk of suicide. Now, of course, I appreciate the noble Lord's long-standing concerns in this area. I accept that we didn't always get it right in the past. There were, prior to the strengthening of our approach in 2019, a small number of sexual assaults committed by transgender women in the women's estate. But we learnt the lessons of that. Since 2019, there have been no such assaults. But let me just make this point as well. Even if, God forbid, there were such an assault, that would not necessarily mean the policy was wrong. Regrettably, there are assaults in prisons not infrequently. So I'm not going to lay my hat on the line and say as soon as we have an assault, that necessarily means the policy is not working. That would also be a fundamentally mistaken approach. What we do, however, is consider the risks and we put an appropriate policy in place. To pick up the specific questions put by the noble Lady Baroness Falcon of Margravine, it's not unlawful to hold trans women with GRCs in the men's estate. There are already powers in place to do so. Trans women are routinely held in the men's estate, and trans men are routinely held in the women's estate. I think I have therefore answered all the questions that have been put to me. But let me just end on one final point. A number of noble lords have put to me and put to the government that there is public disquiet about this. We have put in place a policy which we think provides for the proper management of transgender prisoners and the proper protection of all women in the women's estate. And I'm not going to make any apology for putting management and protection first, and what is said to be public opinion, whether on Twitter or anywhere else, second. Because I'm conscious that in our prisons also we have people who are being found guilty of the most heinous crimes, such as sexual violence against children. And we don't manage those prisoners by the way public opinion might suggest that they be managed. And I think a proper criminal justice system takes account of the considerations which I've set out. And for those reasons, I would invite noble lords to withdraw the amendment.
So you just heard in the speech, Lord Pannick was very clear that he does not agree with Lord Blencathra's amendment. He's not prepared to support it. Now, Lord Pannick is an eminent QC. That means that he's a lawyer, a barrister with lots and lots and lots of experience. So he's very, very comfortable with making spoken contributions in the House of Lords. And he's done that a lot. And obviously, he's part of the justice system as a QC. So he's very interested in the justice system, and many of his interventions relate to the police crime bill and many other similar pieces of legislation that are being debated. It's also clear, if you look at the contributions that he's made where women are discussed or when it concerns women, he has put the concerns and the priorities of people with a transgender identity above the concerns and priorities of women in his priority list. Now, some people that do this are doing it for nefarious reasons or malicious reasons, like they hate women or whatever. I actually don't think that's true for everybody. I think that an awful lot of people, the vast, vast majority of people, can be persuaded by rational argument and the presentation of a good case. And I believe that this is true for Lord Pannick. I think that what we need to do with these lords is we need to actually provide some lobbying to help them to see the position that we're standing from, and to understand why we vociferously object to the idea that male-born trans-identified people belong on the female estate. This is not easy, and it's not always going to be successful, but this is the hard work, the grassroots work of politics. It's individually helping people to understand your position. So I would ask you, if you do have a moment, to put pen to paper and write a short note just to explain to Lord Pannick what your concerns are, and you know, whether you feel that he has addressed them in his contributions or not, you know, what you would suggest that he reads, or people that you would like him to talk to. Personal letter, I believe a personal letter that's polite and respectful of the fact that, you know, a conversation is doesn't have a set end point. You can still agree to disagree at the end of the conversation. That's fine. That's what democracy is all about. But do write a note if you have a moment. Thank the Lords that have supported women's rights in the Lords, and, you know, reach out and have a go at persuading the ones that didn't. So thanks for joining me for the video. We had a little look at Lord Pannick's contributions. I think he probably is persuadable, so I would encourage you to write to him if you have a moment. We will be looking at further of the Lords that spoke in the House of Lords. Some of them persuadable, some of them probably not persuadable. So I'll see you again soon for another video.